Thanks for joining us once again. Today's focus is the 800 miles for the new version of the Tesla Semi. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. We also want to thank our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the show, like some better ideas on investing and trading, please join us on Patreon. So, just a note, we have about 6 minutes for the initial portion of our show and then another 4 minutes afterwards regarding implications. So I started seeing a number of stories on YouTube regarding an 800 miles of range for the Tesla Semi. And my reaction to that was like, it's good if it's happening, but if you look at the website for Tesla, it still has 500 miles as the range for the vehicle. So the answer to it is that after doing some digging, I determined it is true. There is 800 miles of range now available. So the next question that popped up was, of our 5 points for the day, was, does the 800 miles matter? And there's a bunch of different angles to that. Number one, at 500 miles, there were none available. And even at 800 miles, there are even fewer available because more people will want to buy them. Number two, the issue that comes up is, what I call I'll call it the 50 mile rule. So the number, I believe, is 11 hours is allowed in a truck, and then you've got to switch to another driver or go to a backup. And most of the running that we've seen on the Tesla Semi has been a single driver in the center, and usually not a backup driver or even a sleeper cab for that backup driver. So what this then means is that we have an interesting challenge, which is if you're at 500 miles and the average distance is 50 miles per hour, you therefore have a 500 mile vehicle. The actual mileage capability of the truck at the top end version has always been that higher number. And so one of the problems that's kind of popping up is, well, wait a second, if I have the extra miles, does it matter if I'm dealing with one driver? Because that person is going to have to go for a rest break. And during that rest break, they can actually recharge the battery and therefore don't need the extra range. You can ask questions like, well, what if there's no place to charge wherever the vehicle is at the time, or it gives more flexibility on where the vehicle might go or how far the delivery range of the vehicle might be if it was delivering on a freight basis. So there are definitely ways to utilize that extra range, going from, let's say, 500 to 800 miles of range. I believe perhaps the most important way that extra range can be used is in high or low temperatures, particularly if you look at where all of these vehicles have sold the most, at least in the United States, has been in Southern California. The temperature range tends to be very comfortable for the EV batteries, and there aren't a lot of disaster stories of batteries running out of power because they were so busy warming themselves. So in theory, let's say the truck at 800 miles loses half of its range and it's in a cold climate, that's still 400 miles of delivery ability. This is kind of big because if you recall, BYD was actually about to take over a large contract ahead of Tesla from Loblaws in Canada. And the reason they lost out was they had a 150 mile, 200 mile range battery. Once they had to deal with the cold temperatures in Greater Toronto, they found that they were using half their battery for things like heating in the cabin for the driver, as well as the battery just conditioning itself to an operating temperature that worked. And it basically cut the range down so low that you barely got from a distribution center to a grocery store and now you have to charge back up, and that would take hours, and that truck driver was stuck. So we went from BYD about to open a nice production facility in Canada that would service first Loblaws and then other manufacturers, to them deciding that the whole thing wasn't going to work. And even in the case of, they switched to Freightliner at Loblaws, but Freightliner was a little bit sharper in that instead of tackling the temperatures of Ottawa or Toronto, they decided to introduce the e-Cascadia in Vancouver, which is actually a lot warmer, and so the climate was just a better choice, and the experiment of doing sort of deliveries to the grocery stores there has actually worked out quite well. So the most important, I think, or second most important behind, the added range for cold temperatures or hot temperatures per se, with the battery managing temperature to control what's ideal for itself, is that I believe that this actually doubles the usable market that Tesla might be going after. Yeah, you could argue that there's an extension of the amount of vehicles so if Elon initially planned on a 250 mile range, so a distribution truck would go out 250 miles, come back 250 miles, and that's your 500, was what he originally stated. Well, obviously when you go to 800 miles, the range you can run is about 400 miles out, 400 miles back, and so that's definitely a higher utility. The challenge, though, I saw with this is that, the way the United States works anyway, Elon said that 70% of the large trucks that move in the United States were basically 250 miles or less. There's this marketplace that's called FedEx going from, let's say, Los Angeles to Texas, or Los Angeles to Atlanta. And so there is a long haul market there, and this vehicle now becomes competitive for use on those runs, and it grows the number of vehicles that I think it's appropriate for the Semi to be considered. So the other thing I think about this 800-mile new information is the RV market. So California has now started, as of 2025, is banning ICE, mobile homes, etc. And that 800 miles of range for a vehicle like an RV is phenomenal. Not only you're not going to use the entire 800 miles of range in terms of moving the vehicle, but now you can realistically park the vehicle, use it for several days at an RV center, possibly even have the RV centers put in charging facilities for these. And now you have a beautiful situation where, trucks are on a limited basis used with large fifth wheel or as part of some kind of a RV trailer. But now that we're going to 800 miles, there's all kinds of power there to be used for sort of comfortable living by the owners of those RVs. So I think this is actually kind of good news, because it basically expands the footprint of how one might use the Tesla Semi in your operations. One last note I wanted to make is today, because we were working with the Semi, I decided to run some B-roll footage of the Tesla Semi making a run from Fremont, California to San Diego, California, approximately 500 miles. In particular, you'll notice that, the scenes from the highway, etc., are not a big deal. We slowed the video down just a little bit for you, but I wanted to encourage you to slow down this video more slowly. That way you can get a chance to look at the screens left and right for the driver, because I think you'll find that looking at some of the mapping that they're doing, looking at some of the data that's being spewed by the vehicle as it's moving. It's kind of interesting. Not huge, earth-shattering, but definitely interesting to see more. As you know, we tend to have a situation where when we get footage from Tesla, if they really don't want you to dig into it, they'll put it out at a very high rate of speed. And with those high speeds, it's hard for you to see anything at all other than just get a feel for what's going on. But if you slow this down, I think you'll find the reviewing of this kind of interesting. So in general, I wanted to say congratulations to Tesla for going to the 800 miles of range. I have to say I'm a little bit confused by it because it might be better to use the 800 miles of range to reduce the battery pack size. That way you can carry more freight for that vehicle because you're not having the freight show up in terms of the size of the battery pack. So I think it's, there's nothing wrong with more range. There are flexibilities it gives you, but I'd have to say that it's a little bit strange to me because the big issue right now is that every pound of weight that you gain on the vehicle, the more freight you can carry because you're limited to 82,000 pounds for the electric truck. And I kind of feel like if you've got that, it might have been more interesting to add more range or less range, but reduce the pack size because that lowers the cost to purchase the vehicle and increases the amount of freight that you can carry for that vehicle. The other note to make once I say that is that most of the semis, particularly for the first year or two, are all going to be part of fleets of different sizes. So anytime you're a fleet and buying multiple copies, hundreds of copies, thousands of copies, you can now start tweaking those vehicles to fit the routes that they're going to be on. So do not be surprised if you end up with, let's say, a 500-mile range vehicle being chopped down to 300 miles because the route that it's now being put on is optimized by having the ability to haul more freight with less range. So the real range of the vehicles, I think, is going to change very much in line with what the fleet's needs might be. So this is the end of our comments on the 800-mile range Tesla Semi. Congrats on that. Next, we'd like to review our usual health tips. This is just a reminder. Numerous of our doctors suggest no more than once a week for fried foods, also staying away from, deli meats, etc. I actually, if you look behind me there, you'll notice that we have a bunch of mint. So I've now started incorporating mint in the form of part of a salad to eat it raw, as well as on a daily basis having a mint tea. And if you want to look up some of the vitamins available, I just think it's a great thing to grow because it's actually a weed. And if you, get one or two pieces, plant them, you'll soon have 50 of them and you'll have nice additions to your salad, etc. So it's very easy to work with and tastes great. So wanted to highly recommend that. Once again, we want to thank you for joining us. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Tschüss, au revoir, lahit road, hodai, fest, ni hao ma. And in Jamaica, we say, enough respect, walk good. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day, and bye for now.